patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Dan Gainor is on the line with us. He is the Vice President and T. Boone Pickens Free Market Fellow with the Business and Media Institute, businessandmedia.org, the conservative think tank. Dan, welcome to the show. Good morning.
Good morning, or actually afternoon, I guess, for me, but
yep.
It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, always good to have you, Dan. Dan, I admit to some ambivalence about this topic. I find this fascinating. There is a program. There has been a program that's been running for a couple of years in Washington, D.C., where and a few other places actually, but D.C. is the one that's been getting all the attention, where students are being paid anywhere from $50 to $100 in some cases. What, a week or a month?
Yes, I think I get paid on. I guess they're probably like district teachers. I think they get paid every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks,
yeah.
For grades, basically. And when our kids were growing up, we knew. We lived in a kind of upper middle class white suburb in Newt Gingrich's district in the suburbs of Atlanta in Roswell, Georgia, and I knew a lot of parents who paid their kids to get good grades. And Louise and I had long debates about this because I thought that we should do it, and she thought that we shouldn't do it. And in fact, I even thought that we should, pay our kids for doing some things around the house that would go beyond their normal chores. On the other hand, I think that there are things that just fall into the category of being a member of the family that people should do because they're a member of the family. And this program is called the Capital Gains Program. And what I find interesting about it is that unlike the voucher programs, we've had 2 studies now by Bush's own Department of Education that looked at the voucher programs in Washington, D.C., which were shut down in March of this year, and found that they had no impact on students' academic performance. There was an exhaustive 8-year study in Milwaukee of their school voucher program. The Economic Policy Institute has some detailed papers on this. No relationship between vouchers and school performance. The big difference seems to be the background of the parents. And so vouchers don't work, but apparently, according to the early results, paying kids for grades does work. And do you think that that's a bad thing?
Well, I think it's great that they do something. I think if the family wants to pay them, that's up to a family choice. I think as a society, paying people to try to succeed is just sending the wrong message entirely. And I
Isn't that what we do with adults? It's called having a job?
Well, but again, people, you're not forcing companies to pay. You'd be forcing you and me to pay some kid who is essentially boosting their own career potential. If you don't go to school.
Well, that's the whole point of education.
Yeah, that's right. You don't have to pay them to go.
But the forcing you and me part is what you're really objecting to. You are objecting to public education that is paid for with tax dollars.
No, I'm objecting to bribing them. Public education should and will always be a part of our society. Well, it will. But we should always have, where I would disagree with you wildly, is the voucher part. I just was reading a piece from the Wall Street Journal just a few minutes ago talking about disagreeing with some of your assessment about voucher programs. And the ultimate test in our society tends to be, do people want something? And since, we just got bombarded with day after day after day of Michael Jackson coverage, allegedly because people really wanted it, well, then if that's the case, people really want voucher programs too.
Well, actually what's happened in D.C. is that most of the people who are participating in voucher programs, I'm agreeing with you that the public schools were not the first choice of people. And that what was happening was that as more and more magnet schools, charter schools were opening up, that people were moving to the charter schools. The problem with voucher programs is like, there was a great study out in New Orleans, for example. They found that the average rate, the average annual rate for kids to go to the private schools that actually showed increases in performance was $22,000 a year, whereas the state capped vouchers at $6,300. So vouchers are basically subsidies for rich, largely white folks who can afford to send their kids to a private school.
That's garbage.
Because
I'm a prime example of a private school student who actually went to public school for university. My father's in the fire department, for goodness sake. My mother worked in a hospital, and she only worked part-time. Everything that we got trying to send, my parents sending us to private school, my parents got because my father worked extra. He worked part-time driving a cab. but what happens for people who send their kids to private school? Rich people will always send their kids to private school. Obama's, for instance, they have millions of dollars. They send their kids to private school. That's what rich people do. So the people who are hurt by lack of vouchers are the people who live on the edge, who are barely able to afford this or can't afford it.
No, those are the people who are hurt by underfunded public schools.
No, again, the people who aren't getting vouchers basically are getting double taxation.
No, the middle-class people who are getting vouchers are getting subsidies for private schools. The poor people who are getting vouchers are not getting enough money to send their kids to private schools, and the net effect of the whole thing is to destroy the public school system. Why not look at ways that improve the public school system? And if paying kids for grades, particularly kids for whom $100 is a hell of a lot of money, if paying kids for grades actually improves their performance, what's wrong with it?
Well, first of all, paying people for performance is great in a job when they're full-time employees. When they are there to learn to benefit themselves, you shouldn't be paying them.
Okay.
Secondly, and the idea of preventing people from getting vouchers perpetuates a public school system that is horribly failing already. We don't need to destroy the public school system. The public school system has already done its part on its own.
Well, over the last 30 years, ever since Reagan began the process of whacking away at public schools, I'll agree with you that we've had a lot of so-called conservative reforms, from just cutting back pay to the No Child Left Behind that are destroying our public schools.
Spending is higher in the United States than it is anywhere else.
Okay, let me argue against myself for a moment.
Fine. Does that mean I have to take your position?
I don't know. I think of public schools. I'm not sure you'd want that either. It would be interesting to compare, but some other time. In my opinion, one of the major purposes of public education, or of education in general, is to encourage creativity, critical thinking skills, social skills, music, art, to take people out of the box, to not teach to the test, to not necessarily make sure that people have reading, writing, and arithmetic, although we want those things to happen. If you look at the experience of Waldorf schools, for example, or the Steiner model of education, where kids aren't even asked to start learning to read until they're 7 years old. Yet these kids, typically by the age of 16, are outperforming 18-year-olds in most public schools, or even in most private schools. What you find is that when kids are encouraged to engage in things that, in debate, in deeper discussion of topics, that really extraordinary and wonderful things happen. And I'm concerned that if we're paying kids for grades, we're basically paying them to study for the test, and that we're back to teaching to the test, which is the worst side of public education.
Well, but the problem, and speaking as an employer, and you should remember this too, the reason why we teach certain things and all those other things are great, and I'm not disagreeing with any of the lists you just made, debate and all those other things, critical thinking, wonderful to have kids do it. But the problem is the kids coming out of school right now can't do basic math, their reading comprehension stinks, and their ability to string together a sentence that doesn't have texting.
Agreed. And here's the ultimate thing, Dan Gainor. The one variable that always seems to be consistent is the income of their parents. If we simply increase the minimum wage and unionize more parents, I don't think we'd have as many kids failing in schools.
Well, it's not the only. What about single-parent homes? I mean, we went from having the nuclear family and the liberal social values have blown that up to the point where now we have a lot of single-parent homes. It's becoming the norm.
You mean when we decriminalize divorce?
No, we have the norm for a lot of poorer families to be divorced, raising lots of kids. You can't raise kids in that environment and expect them to learn.
Well, it's also the norm in a lot of non-poor families. But I think it's economic. I don't think it's cultural. But interesting.
I think it's both.
Okay, I'll agree with you on that.
Okay.
Dan Gainor, businessandmedia.org is the website. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
16 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you.